Right, okay, I think we can start now. Sorry about the delay. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the workshop Investigating Political Candidates to Strengthen Election Integrity. Our goal today is essentially to share experiences from around the world where either journalists or citizens, civil society organizations have actually set up projects to answer what is, I believe, a very essential question, which is who are the people that we are electing to be our representatives. This might seem like a very, very basic question, but as you will see, finding out the answers for this is not really easy, and in some countries, extremely complicated. So these different initiatives around the world are essentially trying to shed some light into that question. I'm very happy to be joined by three amazing panelists joining us from Mexico, from the US, and from Germany. So I will introduce them now, and then they will start their presentations. Let's start with Brandy. Brandy Swinesgood. She is a veteran investigative journalist from the US, and she is currently the executive director of Sunlight Search. Sunlight is an organization that seeks to strengthen democracy through accountability research on political candidates. So essentially, Brandy is a very, very busy woman this year, until November for sure. So thanks a lot, Brandy, for joining us today. Let's go to Germany. David Fraven, thanks a lot for coming here. David is also an experienced investigative journalist, and he is the founder and publisher of Correctiv. I think at this stage, everybody knows what Correctiv is, but for those of you who don't know yet, Correctiv is a German-based non-profit independent newsroom doing mostly investigative journalists. So thanks, David, for joining us today. And let's leave journalism and go to civil society. Mariel Miranda, she's joining us from Mexico. She's a political scientist, and she works for Transparencia Mexicana. So thanks, Mariel, for being here. So how is this going to work? I mean, our goal here today is that you can learn as much as you can from these panelists, also that you can also share your initiatives. So we want that you take these tools and maybe use them in your own countries. So that's what we want to do. We will have a very brief presentation from our three speakers here first, then a round of my questions, just two questions, so that's fine. And then we'll just open the floor to all of you so you can actually ask them some questions and also share your experiences. So if you're working on similar projects, we would really be very happy to hear you. So just, raise your hand and we'll get to that. Right, so let's go to the first presentation. So I'm going to turn to Brandy, US. Extremely busy political year. Brandy, how is Sunlight investigating political candidates? And I'm going to give you this because you're going to need, okay, there you go. That's right. You can just click next and then you're going to see the slides.
So at Sunlight Search, we are investigating candidates and training newsrooms and both them and engaged citizens on how to really dig deeply into the backgrounds of candidates who are running for public office, regardless of the party they're affiliated with. So what we're doing is helping people to gather really the critical information that voters need to make decisions about which candidates should actually earn their trust. So this sort of started with the experience of George Santos. I don't know if many of you are familiar with him, but just by way of a little bit of background, he was elected to represent New York in Congress. His resume was essentially a raft of lies. He had lied about everything in his background, from where he went to school to the jobs that he had had. And no one understood that until after he was elected to office and had begun committing all kinds of frauds. And so we were sort of blown away by that experience, and we wanted to understand, what could have been known about George Santos before he was actually elected to office. So one of the first things we did was we set about putting together a timeline of using all the documents that would have been publicly available about George Santos before he was elected, so that we could understand what would have been possible to know. So we put together this timeline. And what it showed us was that all of his wild claims and the stories that he had made up could have been known before he was elected to office if those documents had been obtained. So some of the things that our timeline showed us was that, at the same time he claimed to have been working at really high-profile firms like Goldman Sachs, he was also being evicted from pretty modest apartments across the city, showing that he was already lying about who he was and his success. So using those experiences, the lessons that we learned from George Santos, and also our own investigative backgrounds, we designed a pretty comprehensive curriculum, sort of a training manual, to help both reporters and engaged citizens understand how to do this deep digging in a really systematic, structured way. And so what we help them to understand is how to verify these kinds of claims that candidates are making. So when it comes to their professional history, what are the sort of licenses and business records that we can obtain that prove or disprove what they've said about their success as a business person? Then we put all those lessons together and we put them into action with examples like the one you see here, where we ask the students to just search lobbying records to see what they can find out about a lobbyist. So both with these lessons and putting the lessons into work, we really show them in a detailed way how to do this digging on their own. So using our curriculum, so far we've trained more than a dozen fellows who are actively looking into candidates, putting together these timelines to do this kind of deep research on candidates, both Democrats and Republicans. And we're providing the research that we find to newsrooms so that they can then share that information with voters, and hopefully voters, when they go to the polls this November, can make much more informed decisions about the candidates that they're choosing from. And some of the information we're finding is really important. We've found already one candidate who didn't graduate from the university she claimed to have graduated from. And we found another candidate who wasn't even registered to vote in the state where he was running to be elected. So between now and the November elections, we're hoping to train 50 to 75 newsrooms on how to do this kind of research, how to put together these timelines that really reveal piece by piece who a candidate really is. And what we're hoping to do is to support newsrooms in this really sort of resource-strapped time period to go beyond the sort of horse race coverage that we see that really dominates election coverage when resources are strapped. We think it's the kind of journalism that not only strengthens democracy, but really helps to build trust between the newsrooms and the communities they represent.
Wonderful. Thanks a lot, Franzi. Well, maybe you can use... Yeah. Okay. Right, so we'll have more questions for you, and I'm sure the audience will have questions, but we'll go back. And now let's move, let's move to Mexico first, and then we'll just go with the German case. So, Mariel, Mexico's coming out of a very important election now, and you're here to talk to us about Transparency initiative, which is called 3 de 3, 3 out of 3? Yeah. Because it actually asks politicians to provide 3 pieces of information. So let us know, what's that campaign? What are those 3 pieces of information?
Thank you for letting us be here and for sharing the space. I'm Mariel, I'm part of Transparencia Mexicana, the Mexican chapter of Transparency International, and I want to talk to you about 3 de 3, which is an initiative that started in 2015 in Mexico. Throughout this conference, we've been talking of the different problems that democracies have. Old problems, new problems. I want to talk to you about one of the oldest problems, that it's propaganda. Propaganda has been related to democracy since forever. As there are political parties, they started doing propaganda to try to differentiate from each other. And although propaganda has renewed and it's looking for different strategies and it's really innovating in how to get to voters, actually that's not happening to information. That's also a key part of democracies. Just to let you know, for example, in Mexico in 2021, only 1 of 3 voters had information, minimal information on the candidates that they were voting off. As a Mexican, I can say that on the other side, our candidates are getting more creative with propaganda, and their TikToks, their dances in different social media are getting better and better. So,
Sure.
yeah, thank you. So yeah, information is the raw material of democracies, and we need to acknowledge that there are different uses of information. Information is relevant for voters in order to contrast between different candidates and try to make the better decision for them. Information is really useful for journalists to try to find the truth on what the sayings of the different participants in the elections. And information is also useful for anti-corruption agents in order to reduce the conflicts of interest and reduce the risk of state capture. But we need to ask ourselves, what type of information do we need of our candidates? Transparencia Mexicana realized that we need at least two main types of information or photos of each person that tries to govern us. First, we need a first photo of that person that's trying to get into the public arena. Their first photo is the photo as a candidate, and this photo serves us to prevent the access to power to people that are not trustworthy. We need a second photo, like if they win, we need a photo of them as a public servants in order to make them accountable for their actions as in public office. So that's mainly what 3x3 is in Mexico, is a photo of information of candidates and also of public servants that allows us to have like historical records in order to compare how they get into office and how they are living out of office. 3x3 has been an before and after for the electoral game in Mexico. Through the slogan, if they want your vote, ask them to present the 3x3, we shift the power dynamics of the elections, because now candidates are not only asking people for their vote, but people are asking them to give information in order to take the better decision for them. Second, we moved the limits of the private sphere, because as probably you can know, some people told us that we were trespassing the right of privacy of the candidates, because we were asking them to disclose information on assets, interest, and taxes declarations. What we convince the public opinion about is that everyone who wants to get involved in the public sphere needs to be held to a stronger standard related to transparency. This initiative has been replicated in Colombia, in Guatemala, and Costa Rica, and also has inspired other initiatives that are starting to grow in Mexico, such as the 3x3 de género, the gender, 3 of 3 related to gender issues. And I'm glad to say that no single president in Mexico has been elected without disclosing information on assets, interests, and taxes. So finally, I'm really glad to be here, not only to share the Mexican experience, but because we are starting a conversation on what are like the minimal information that we need for our candidates. As I said, is assets declaration to avoid embezzlement, interest declaration to reduce the risk of conflict of interest and state capture, and taxes declarations, because we believe in fiscal justice, and we need to see that they are really committed to bring public resources of their own to the arena. Now, with these three pieces of information, we know that the uses might be really diverse. We know that citizens will use this information, that journalists will use this information. We acknowledge that political parties and those who do propaganda will use that information either to boost it, to deny it, to lie about it, but information is a key piece of democracies. And we are also aware that with the new artificial intelligence tools, information will be also part of that discussion, because we are almost sure that in these 2024 elections in different countries, of course, there are people asking ChatGPT which is the best candidate for them. So we're really glad to be here and to start the conversation.
Thanks a lot. I will go to David in a second, but I have an immediate follow-up question for that, because we were talking before and you mentioned you're also doing that project in other countries, or trying to. So if you could tell us a little bit about that, like how to export it to other countries for people who are here.
Yeah, so we've been trespassing 3 not only with the technology or the platform that we use for candidates to submit their information, but we've been also trespassing the knowledge on how to convince citizens to start demanding 3 for their candidates. Actually, probably that's like the main challenge, to understand that it's not only about the technology or only about the formats that we use to have more information, but mainly to start a campaign and a movement so that voters can shift their minds from propaganda to information.
Wonderful, thanks a lot. You have, yeah, maybe there. Let's go to Germany now. So David, looking at the results of the last EU election, where the AfD, the far-right party in Germany, came second after the Conservatives. Correctiv had actually been investigating AfD before, and not just AfD, but people affiliated, associated with the party. And you discovered pretty shocking information. So this is a secret plan against Germany. Could you tell us a little bit how you did that, what you discovered?
Yeah. So we are working on this AfD investigation for quite a long time, for like 8 years, something like that. And what was interesting, we were able to prove that the whole party was elected to parliament based on illegal actions. There was financing fraud in the campaign trail of the AfD. They used illegal funds to be elected. Afterwards, we could see that they were shifting the whole party system towards the, let's say, Russian side. They wanted for Germany to become allies to Russia, not anymore to a transatlantic partnership. And then this happened. We were able to be part of, or become part of a meeting with AfD officials, with financing parties, people who had a lot of money. And yeah, this was a kind of secret meeting, the best documented secret meeting in German history. And after we were able to publish this meeting, which is maybe a fun story, to document this meeting, we had to rent out a sauna boat. So we could sail across a lake towards this villa where the meeting was, and film the meeting from outside, from the backyard, from the sauna boat. And there were four people on the sauna boat, and 3 were always in the sauna and wanted to photograph and steer the boat. And it was pretty hot. But this was only for the fun part. So we were able to document that. We were able to present that. In the secret meeting, they were talking about what their plans are once the transatlantic alliance is eliminated and they made Germany an ally of Russia. First is they want to disband the human rights, the Declaration of Universal Human Rights. So it's more regional human rights, and you can select what kind of human rights you really want. Second is they want to strip German citizens of their citizenship, so they can alles vertreiben.
Deport?
Evict millions of Germans, and as well as not only for Germany, but for the rest of used to be Germany as well. And this was very horrific scenario. And afterwards, we had in Germany a lot of demonstrations. There was a whole movement to stop the party or the growth of the party. And this was kind of successful. Before that, in the polls, the AfD was around 20 to 25%. And in the election day, they had 16% in Germany. So there was an effect, but not enough. And then we partnered with Sunlight. And we think it's very important to understand who the candidates themselves are. Unfortunately, in Germany, the privacy laws are pretty strict, as in the whole of Europe. And one of the most stupid laws is this is the right to be forgotten. So when you are a criminal and you did commit crime and it was known, so you went to court, you got your verdict, and it was written about the verdict, then after a couple of years you are allowed to delete these files. And if I as a publisher still report on that, then these criminals can sue me. And this happens right now, these days, all over the place. A lot of the mafia guys from Italy now are suing media outlets throughout Europe to delete old reports on their crimes so they can walk free again of all scrutiny. And together with Sunlight, we are working on a way how we can first save these old reporting, but also extend it so we can have reliable information of people, what people said, what people did, and what their curriculum vitae is really about. But it's pretty tough in Europe to get this information.
Sure. Thanks, David. Actually, that's one of the questions that I wanted to ask you also. That comes in nicely. I mean, one of the things is accessing information. You were just mentioning that's quite different in all countries. So some things that are accessible in one country are not in others. So I want to ask all of you, in your own countries, like sometimes it might be that information for some things is already public, people just don't know about it, but in other times you just have to make requests for information to authorities and so on. So what are the most complicated pieces of information that you've actually had to request? Like, how is the process of requesting to governments about this? So maybe Brandy, if you want to start with that.
Sure. Well, I suppose we're very sort of fortunate in the United States in that in many cases we have access to quite a lot of public records. And really the degree to which you are able to obtain public records varies radically from state to state because each of the 50 states sets their own laws about what information is public and what information is private. There's a secondary or a top tier federal level and of information that is much more broadly available. The challenge with that information is that often it takes a very, very long time to get. And so that particularly in an election season when, elections are happening all of the time, it makes it really challenging to come up with that information in a relatively quick manner. But I think one thing that a lot of reporters, particularly in the States, don't understand is there's a lot of information that is just pretty relatively quickly available at your fingertips. And one thing that's a really helpful piece of information that is generally readily available in the States and a lot of reporters don't necessarily know about it, is a candidate's voting record is a public record in most cases in the United States. And so you can contact the county or the area where the candidate lives and ask the county to provide a transcript of all of the elections that person has voted in for the history of their residence in that area. So for instance, about a month ago, there was a debate about a candidate in Texas who had claimed that he had voted, regularly for most of the last 20 years. And when it went to the county, we were able to just go to their online web portal, submit a request through the online portal, and within a couple of hours received a response back that showed us that in fact he had not voted for a 12-year time span during that bit of history. So I think one thing that reporters can do is think about what are the requirements for a candidate to run for office. And then how do they set about proving that they have fulfilled those requirements? Are there documents that they fill out? Are there forms that they fill out that you can then request from the government that they provide to you? And that's one way we go about finding a lot of public information.
Sure. I'm just curious because freedom of information in Europe, each country has its own law. Some countries, even different regions, have their own law. So David, like, what is it that's different in Germany than the US? For example, I'm thinking about privacy, you mentioned some things, or getting the address of candidates in the US, that's something you can do, but we know, because we're also working with this project, that in Germany that's not a thing. So what do you envision as the most difficult thing to find out about candidates?
There are a lot of difficult things. For example, you have a lot of questions you are not allowed to ask. Like in a school, when you want to prove that somebody has got a school degree, it's almost impossible. No school is allowed to answer you on the school degrees or whatever. When it comes to university, a university is not allowed to answer whether somebody was a student at the university. So you can't prove that he was in the university, nor that he finished with a degree. This is only happening if you are able to see his paperwork, if he published something.
Could I ask you a quick question?
What?
Can I ask you a quick question about that? I honestly don't know if this... Do they publish yearbooks and commencement?
No.
At all?
It happens from time to time, but it's very rarely. And in colleges, no.
Yeah.
Just no. But sometimes you see something in students' newspapers, something like this is possible from time to time, but it's very difficult. There's no records on that, so you need to dig it out by yourself. But what I think what is interesting on this systematic approach, once when you started with these, let's say, case-by-case investigations, you don't find the right candidates. When you go with these more systematic approach, you find the people who are really interesting. Let me give you an example. There was one person who was for the very far left, and he was the organizer of the party of the very far left. Then he moved from the west of Germany to the east of Germany and became the party organizer of the far right. He did it for quite a while. Then he moved on to the new formed BSV. This is another far left party. And what you see on this background is, okay, this guy is only an organizing extremist. He's moving from east to west, and he's very strong connections with a Russian organization. So you see, okay, this one is very interesting. And now he's a member of parliament. And this way, you see through these curriculum vitae and make it a sustainable way, already from the very few hints that you get interesting stories.
Sure, so we're already saying like systematic reviewing the candidates in the same way. That's something that I think the audience can also use, and we can get into that. But before that, Mariel, how is it in Mexico?
I would say that although the three declarations, assets, interest, taxes declarations, seem some sort of difficult to disclose, because I mean nobody is happy when others know how much do you earn, or what interest do you have in different companies or organizations, or if we have paid our taxes. Although that's some tricky to disclose. What we have found is that the most difficult data to be open is a number of, or an ID, an identification of the person. As David said, one of the main challenges of tracking the information of candidates and public servants is that we need a public record, and we need to know that the different registrations belong to the same person. Continuing with a metaphor on the photos, we have different photos related to different documents of the same person. But if we don't have one data that allows us to know that that information belongs to the same person, it won't serve at all. So in the Mexican case, what we've been fighting with both candidates as well as public servants and political parties, and it has been even been a discussion with our transparency agencies and bodies, is the disclosure of a number of identification. We have thought of the tax registration number as the main data that we need in order to track people and to know that when we are referring to them in the different documents, we are referring to the same person.
Right, so as I mentioned earlier, I want this to be very practical, hands-on, so you can actually take that to your countries and hopefully do the same as the speakers have done. So I want all speakers now to go into a bit more detail of the tools, the techniques that you've used for these investigations, for these projects. What is the most useful tool, the thing you would say to people who want to do this? This is what you have to do, this is how you have to do it. I'm not going to start with Brandy because I've been doing that all the time, so I'm going to start with David.
I think the system of master files is very helpful. So you start every investigation, in this case also with a spreadsheet. You bring it in the order if you are investigating candidates or in election integrity. I would always go with a timeline. This is most helpful. And then you see the different holes in your investigation or in this curriculum vitae. You see, okay, there is missing like 5 years. What has he done in these 5 years? Another one is to see his business records or her records. But this is also very good if you fit it into these timelines. And what I learned over time, through these timelines, you discover things you wouldn't see in any other case, you know. As I said, these big holes in one's lives, these are stories. And this is, I guess, the most important thing. Start with a spreadsheet and a master file. Sure. And document every piece of information that there is. So put in the spreadsheet only stuff that you really know, not stuff you assume that might be right, only stuff that is correct.
Sure. I see Brandy nodding there, so like, if you want to go next.
You totally stole my thunder. That was exactly what I was going to say. Just to reiterate what David said, chronology is absolutely critical to understanding who a candidate is and where the sort of pieces of their life overlap in potentially newsworthy ways. So, you know, for instance, it might not appear to be interesting that someone voted for a piece of legislation that would loosen restrictions on a particular industry. That vote in and of itself, perhaps not a big deal. But if you have the information on a timeline that shows you a week prior to that politician received a hefty contribution from someone who's a lobbyist from that industry, well, suddenly that bit of information about his vote is a lot more interesting. But you can only understand those connections if you put it together in a chronological way where you can see how those pieces overlap and fit together. One other piece that I would talk about that we feel is critical is also a source list that we put together at the same time as we're compiling the chronology. So at each sort of instance that we put on the chronology, we also try to understand who are the people that were associated with that event and with the candidate at the same time, and understanding as much information as we can about that person so that you can then contact them to put into context what happened and to really fill in those details that the documents and the data themselves can't provide. And so if you're keeping sort of this chronology on one hand and this source list on the other, you're able to put together a story in a relatively straightforward and systematic way that illuminates what the candidate has done in a much more holistic way than you would by otherwise just having disparate pieces of information that you can't see how they connect.
Good. Thanks a lot for that. Brandy, Mario?
I would agree. Probably the most useful tool is to have the right data structure, mainly to keep the historical record like in time and in the right place, and that you can compare the different databases in order to track the trajectory of the different candidates and different public servants. And I would say that the second tool that has like been really meaningful to Mexico is to have a community that demands for that information, in particular when the information is not mandatory. When there is someone that is starting, there's someone that's running as candidate for the first time, actually there's not so much information or not public available information of that person. So voters and citizens and civil society organizations demanding for that people to be held to a stronger standard and to disclose information on these three pieces is key for us.
Great. We'll open the floor for questions in 2 minutes, so just write them down because I'm just going to let you ask them in a bit. But I have 2 more questions for the speakers here. So the first one is about the consequences, like what happens when you publish these investigations, the information. From what I gather, like there's some success stories from what Mario said, David, in a way also. What's your experience, like once you've published this information about candidates and so on, do you feel like they get elected, they don't get elected? Like what happens after, I guess, that's what I want to know. Do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, with something really interesting happened with 3 de 3, and it's that when the voters realized that their candidates were not disclosing the information and were not submitting the information in the platform, they didn't vote them. Not because of the content, but mainly because they don't trust someone that can open the minimal information so in order to know them better. So I would say that that's the main consequences that we have seen after 3 de 3.
In the US?
So Sunlight's relatively new. We only started this process about 9 months ago. But we are seeing that the information does make somewhat of a difference. So in a case in California, we published a story about this candidate who had really portrayed herself as someone who had worked her way up from the ground. She pulled herself up by her bootstraps, sort of, and made her way to becoming this successful businesswoman. And part of that story was true, but what she didn't tell the voters was that 10 years before she had run for office, she had actually been on the verge of bankruptcy. Her home was being foreclosed upon. Her wages were being garnished for unpaid debts. And she only became wealthy after she married the co-founder of the company that she worked for. And so we published a story sort of outlining those details. And that story became one of the most viewed pieces of viewed web pages on the site. And what we noticed was that all the traffic to that website was coming from the specific area of the country where she lived, because that story was the only piece of information about her other than what she had published in her campaign. So people wanted to understand more information about that candidate. They were coming to that website to get more information. And she ended up not making it out of that primary election to become a candidate. So I think, obviously the impact is going to differ, and what we're seeing across the United States, especially if you look at, high-profile politicians, is that a lot of times, seemingly devastating stories don't always have that impact, but I think people do want the information and they want to understand who these candidates are.
Great. So far, quite successful stories. David, about the AFD.
Yeah, I'm not so sure what success is. To me, when I think about that, for me the most important stuff is when people really start to think about what they are doing with their vote in the elections. And it's very, very difficult to measure, because it's not only one thing that they think of when they are voting for a candidate. And what we aim for is just to provide more context to this decision-making process. And very, very difficult to understand what is really going on.
Sure. So let's move to my last question, a bit inspired by your campaign of 3 out of 3. I want to ask you, which are the 3 main pieces of information to all of you that you think citizens should know before actually deciding on whether they want to elect someone as their representative? Okay, David, you go.
First one is the real name. This is already something. Second is the basic political point of view that somebody has got. And people are rephrasing words. And the real meaning of these words, this translation of these political views is most important. And then if somebody is a fraud or not. You know, people can invent a lot of stuff, and being a fraud is too easy.
Right. Franzi?
I think the three pieces of information that I find are helpful to understand is really understanding how that person made a living, understanding their sort of financial history. That helps you to know, what industries are they aligned with? Have they been a good money manager? Because essentially when we're electing someone to office, we're saying, please manage our tax money that we're giving to you. So what has been their history with actually managing their own or their company's finances? Have they been in bankruptcy? Do they owe money, or do their companies owe money to other people? That really helps you to understand sort of any potential weaknesses or vulnerabilities for graft or corruption. The second piece of information I think is really critical to understand is their political history. So if they've been in public office before, who supported them, what was their voting history, what kinds of policies did they support, and if they are new to politics, what's their motivator? Why are they here, and who is behind them? Who's contributing money to their campaigns? What is motivating them to get into politics, which we all understand is not an easy place to be. So why would they put themselves in that position? And then sort of thirdly, along with that, I think it's absolutely critical to understand who is funding their campaign, who is actually putting money behind these candidates, because often those are the people whose work that the candidate is actually doing. So understanding where their money is coming from really is critical to illuminating what kind of policies they actually support and what their work is going to be like.
Right.
I would stay with these three pieces of information. I think that we need the assets declaration because we want to know how much they have before they get into office, and after they leave office, how much do they have. Second, interest, because we want to know which private interest might get in conflict with the public interest when they need to make a decision. And last, the taxes declaration, because we want to know that they also contribute to the public resources.
Right, so a lot of the same things or the different ones. So I want to now open the floor for questions, comments. If you're doing similar projects, please let us know, because we're all really happy also to hear from you and collaborate with you. So there will be a mic. A colleague, Farah, is going to just put the mic there. So we'll collect. Let's do a few rounds. So the first round, just 2 questions. So yeah, send them on that.
Thanks. Hello, I'm Andrew Rogan with the International Foundation for Electoral Systems. So as you can probably imagine, this issue is something we work on globally. And one of the things that we are repeatedly seeing is the flow of illicit finance to political candidates and political parties. So I have 2 questions. So first, how are you looking at some of these challenges with illicit finance, particularly if there's any foreign connections, because that's been on the rise across the globe, and AFD being a great example of that. And then second, have there been any investigations taken up by oversight institutions or law enforcement in response to some of the information that you've published, or any of the information that's been in the public domain about political candidates from some of the work that you've done? Thanks.
Okay, maybe let me stop you there, because I think there's already 2 questions, so I'm just going to let you answer that one, and we'll do it that way.
The question of the financing, especially the cross-border financing, is really difficult. For example, the AFD got the money from Switzerland, and to get any information on finances in Switzerland is pretty difficult. But it is still possible. but it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of insiders. So there is no public record at all. You need to get into the party, you need to get documents from within the party, and with that documents then you can hopefully find something. In this particular case, we were able to prove that around 5 to, I'm not so sure, 5 to 6 or 7 million euros were coming or funneled through Switzerland into the pockets of the AfD. And this caused a criminal investigation, and the AfD was fined already for a part of this, and the big part is still coming. And the fine for that will be, we estimate, around 30 to 50 million euros, only the fine. But it's just one case. And what I'm now talking about, this was in the very beginning. This was when somebody thought, okay, we are going to buy us some fascists into parliament. This was the very beginning, like 10 years ago. What is now happening? Now in these days we are talking really about power structures. What if you can buy, a minister-president of Germany? It's possible right now. And I'm sure that people are doing that with a lot of money, with enough money. And I guess they are doing it via maybe Switzerland, maybe some other countries, who knows. And I see here is for us as a journalistic organization like a wall we can't go through. We can't see what is going on into the international financing structures. It's impossible. Yeah. And we just need to try whatever is possible.
One of the things that we're trying to really look at as we look at campaigns and how they're financed is how the use of nonprofit organizations, particularly in the United States, there are a number of candidates who are setting up nonprofits and PACs in order to funnel money in really untransparent ways to candidates so that you have less of an understanding of actually where that money is coming from. But as David said, it's really, the laws are written in such a way that it really obfuscates where the money is coming from and is really difficult to find out. But that is something we're trying to penetrate and understand more about as we look into the candidates.
Sure. Yeah, like I would say that probably that's the relevance of having the same data structure, and that's part of the relevance of trying to have the conversation to share the same standard information on the candidates, because then not only journalists or citizens can get into the data, but for example, the financial intelligence units can cross the data, the same information. It would be easier, but actually, yeah, it's kind of tricky.
Can I add something?
Sure.
And what I think what is very interesting right now, I guess we haven't understood what the war in Ukraine is really doing with the whole democratic world, We were always moving forward and said, okay, we need to be more transparent. We need to have more legislation on transparency or financing or whatever. But now we have a foreign power that is dedicated to destroy our democratic structures. And we can't imagine how they are using all these transparency laws and whatever there is against us. And this is also very, very difficult for, I think, for our whole, our tool set, Very hard to understand what is really good, what is bad, and so on.
Yeah, that's definitely a very interesting topic that I would just go into, but I'm going to let the audience ask questions and then I'll go back to that. There was a gentleman over there. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, you.
Hi, my name is Stelios Orfanidis. I'm from OCCRP. The initiatives that you have described, your investigations, all seem to have positive results. But still, we see in several democracies in the past years, candidates being successful despite all the negative information that is available about them, that has been documented in real time in certain cases. A small example is Donald Trump in the United States, Boris Johnson in the UK. There are several other examples around the world of candidates that benefit, that thrive on this negative information. So what is the solution, in your opinion, that should apply in this type of cases? So how do you go, what do you do when you have this type of candidates who see their popularity skyrocket every time they are convicted, let's say, for a criminal offense or whatever else? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. We'll collect another one while you think of the solution. If you have it, yeah, just let us know. So let's collect another question from, yes, there's a gentleman there that's closer to the mic. So.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for this very interesting session. My name is Fahad, and I'm from Madagascar, Transparency International Madagascar, and I'm in charge of election monitoring unit, and also about communication and advocacy. My question is more related to consequence of disclosing information, more precisely about the bad consequence, because when we disclose the information, we know that some of the candidates are not happy about disclosing. So could we talk about security and safety about disclosing? That was the first point. The second point is about our initiative. I want to share with you just a little point about our initiative. We have in Madagascar an election monitoring unit, and we have also an investigation unit. But we ask for the people to investigate also in their one initiative. So we have produced in Madagascar tools to help people to make investigation by their one initiative. That's called HiFeed. That means how to vote and for who to vote. So we have established a list of criteria, and it's for the people to share information and to search for the information about their candidates, about all the candidates, and at the end of the list we have a scorecard, and it helps people to vote about what is the best candidate for this election. So just to share with you this little experience about investigating political by the citizens, not by an organization, but by the people. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks a lot for sharing that, also for raising a very important point about security. So let's go. The first question, solution, you already have it. What to do with candidates that get elected, whatever information is published about them. Who wants to take that? Brandy, wonderful.
So I think that in terms of a solution, I think the best solution we have is providing the information, and so that voters can make informed decisions. And we can't control what decisions they make, unfortunately, right? All we can do is lay out all of the facts so that they have those facts upon which to base their decision. I think that there are going to be some candidates, whether it's Donald Trump, there's an attorney general in Texas who's been under indictment his entire career and continues to get reelected to office. Those politicians are going to continue to exist because they have a following, because they have those sort of unique characteristics that drive people to them. And I think one of the things that we can do is understand that there are many, many politicians underneath of those who voters care about because they see them in their everyday lives. Local politicians who they may run into at the grocery store or see on the street. And those politicians actually have a much larger impact on their day-to-day life, whether that's the city council, the county level government, the state level government. And what we're seeing is that when we, in a lot of cases, when we share information about those candidates, when they're people that they see in their real life day to day, that kind of information does make a difference at the local level.
What we are working on, or what I'm working on, is something completely different from that. Of course, I believe this is also the only way to provide the information. But what I understood is when you are in a polarized society and you fool this polarization, then the information you provide is seen as part of this polarization process. So people on the other side of the angle, they don't care about the information itself. It doesn't matter to them. And then, I don't know whether it's only in Germany or in some other places as well. I started to notice when people talk to each other, they first search for a common ground. They start to talk about the weather, about the kids, about the streets, about whatever. But they start to talk about something they agree on. And only when they have found this common place in their communication, then they start to talk about differences, but in a very humble way. And I think of a way, or try to find a way, to include this common ground in the reporting as well. So maybe not start with a very aggressive bit of information in the very beginning, but with information more equivalent to the weather. I don't know. But this is something I think we need to really work on to find this common ground. Maybe it's about words. Maybe it's about a way how we present the information in an environment that it's not so aggressive. I'm not so sure about that. The only thing I see is when I'm in my hometown and I've got a scandal in my hometown about corruption, it's much easier for me to explain it when I'm in a coffee shop and talk to people that are with me than I write a news story where it's very aggressive. The first line, this guy stole that money, you know.
Sure.
Yeah. I would say that we need to work with the idea that people can vote for people that might not be desirable for the public good. I mean, like, people can vote for Bolsonaro's or Trump's or anti-right candidates or people that we know that can do harm, and we need to acknowledge that. But what we are trying to trust in is that with enough information when there are candidates and with enough information once they take the office, is that we can make them accountable, because then we have the enough data to contrast the decisions that they are making to the public interest, or if they or the decision that they are making in case they are benefiting of it. And I think it's also related with the last question on how to pick the best candidate. And I think it is really difficult because we need to balance, at least I need to balance my anger with the past administration in case it was from the same party, or my hopes on different candidates, or the votes that they made in the Congress. I mean, like, the decision is quite complex. So what we have is information to contrast the decisions that they make and try to make them accountable for that decisions.
Sure. So I'm just going to move to the question on security, like disclosing information. What's your experience on that, or any tips that you can share with the member of the audience that asked the question?
I think that is very, very different also from country to country. For example, in Germany, I don't see any big problems. But in other parts of the world, OCCRP knows about that. It's very hard and difficult and very sensitive.
Sure. Do you want?
Yeah, what we have experienced in Mexico is that It's safety and the fear of violence, the main argument that some candidates gave us to not disclose their information. But what we have seen and the evidence shows that disclosing their information on assets, interest, and taxes is not doing harm and is not making more probable for them to experience either violence or safety issues.
Right, thanks. Yeah, as David says, like security is very context dependent, and for sure, just make sure you're safe before actually publishing something. Let's move on to other questions. Who else wants to? Okay. We'll take 3 questions, and then we'll just put them to the audience. So maybe we can do some questions on this side of the room too. Yeah, wonderful. So there's a lady there, and then the gentleman in front.
Hello, my name is Vesela. I represent the Anti-Corruption Fund Foundation in Bulgaria. And actually, just to second what some of you said already, in Bulgaria right now we have a leader of a parliamentary party that's represented in the National Assembly. They came in second in the recent elections, and he was sanctioned under the Magnitsky Act. And despite all this, he was elected and they did splendidly. And actually their party was founded by a person, it's proven that he was part of the repressive regime and the secret service of the old communist regime. And I kind of was struck by something that David was saying about a person politically organizing people first from the extreme left and then the extreme right. And what we've seen in Bulgaria is that there is it's very hard to prove it, so it's a bit of speculation, but in some cases it is proven, for example, with this party that I was mentioning. But there are links with the former secret services and the repressive regime, repressive institutions of the former communist regimes. So are you seeing some similarities in Germany, and perhaps these are the conduits of the Russian influence and of this polarization that you also mentioned, that we're also seeing in Bulgaria very, very clearly?
Right, let's collect 2 more questions. There was another one in the front, yeah.
Good morning. My name is Khalil. I manage the research applications for Camara, and we do strategic research and risk management for civil society. I was wondering if you could talk more about technology, how you're using it. You mentioned, it sounded like there were some external tools like government portals. It also sounded like there were internal tools. And I think a third category might be tools that are accessible to the general public. So I would be really interested to hear how your internal researchers are using it. Do they like using it? How the data is being stored, how it's processed, and if you're able to integrate it successfully.
Great. I'll collect one more on this side and then we'll just move. Yes, there's a lady there at the back. Yes, please.
Great. So thank you very much. My name is Mary Awelanada. I work with the Transparency International chapter in Ghana. I was curious listening to the various presentations talking about strengthening issues around assets, conflict situations. So I wanted all of you to share your perspectives on how you see some of us in contexts where the frameworks are not too favorable for conflict of interest, asset declaration, and also for tax as well. And how in this process we can investigate to determine for the general good who represents the interests of the state and how we can promote those interests in elections. Because we are talking about promoting electoral integrity and how we investigate to get the best candidates out of it. Can you share some experiences on how we can do that? Because we do not have a criminalized conflict of interest regime, and our asset declaration regime is also very restricted. So in that way, then on the issue of ethics in these investigations, what are some of the considerations we put out there as you are reporters and you are doing a lot of investigative work. I just wanted to know about that and how these work together. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks a lot. So I'm going to start. I think the first question goes to David answering.
Yeah. This is something we are looking into, whether the former Stasi or the former Secret Service is connected to these political outcomes. And it's visible that there are links. We have members of parliament who used to work with the Secret Service in the former communist regime. What is interesting to me is the AfD was organized like a Western party. Now we've got a new party which is more organized like a Soviet-style cadre party. It's a party very closed shop. You can't become a member of the party. It's a party of Sarah Wagenknecht. It's very difficult to join the ranks. And all this is very closed shop. But what we can see is they use the same strategies to become elected, the same promotional parts, exactly the same, it's copy-paste. It's just the same persons they are approaching. And what we found out is that some of these persons, they are approaching from the far right, AfD, and the far left, Sarah Wagenknecht, are exactly the same guys working with the former Secret Service of Eastern Germany. And this is what I said. I guess we don't understand what is really going on because Russia or Russian allies putting forward everything that is in their arsenals. And we can't understand what is really going on. Some very strange things happening all over the day.
Sure. Maybe let's move on to the question about technology. Brandy, if you want to take that one.
Sure. We use a really broad spectrum of both new, online technology as well as sort of old-fashioned bootstrap sort of reporting. One of the things that's really helpful that we've found is they're both the Wayback Machine and Klaxon. They're two sorts of technologies that allow you to see what changes are happening on a candidate's website. So Wayback Machine, I'm sure you've all heard of before, but allows you to sort of see what they posted a long time ago and how that has changed. There's another technology called Klaxon that actually you can set up alerts. It will send you messages when information is deleted from or added to a candidate's website. That's been particularly helpful. And then, the FEC is in the States is amazing for parsing through campaign finance data. So that's another sort of, we download all that data and really try to analyze where the money is coming from, as well as understanding, behind that, who are the companies and the actual campaign treasurers and who are actually running the campaigns. Those data points are really helpful. But then a lot of it is really also just understanding that each state, because we've been primarily focusing on US House candidates, and so the laws in each state and what information is available about each candidate, it differs from person to person. And so that's something that technology, it can be your friend or your foe, right? Because we need to have an individual understanding of what the laws are in those states. And then the different types of technologies that the states use and the different counties use really varies from person to person. So where data is available, we try to make sure that we download and save all that data and parse it. And where documents are available, we use Document Cloud and other sort of tools where we can share that information and annotate it so that when we have documentation to share with newsrooms, they don't have to go find the source themselves, but we've shared with them the actual document itself so that they can see and verify the information. So I would say, to answer your question, it's the gamut.
Sure. There was also a very interesting question about the ethical implications on debate before, so maybe Mariel, if you want to discuss that one. Is that something you actually thought before, how to go about this?
May I address first the interest
Sure.
question?
Yeah.
Yeah, I also thought for the interest questions, we need to shift the conversation. That's something that was really important for Mexico, because before the 3 de 3 campaign and the 3 de 3 formats, our candidates said that they disclosed information because there was a format that asked them, do you have a conflict of interest? And they were really happy, like signing in and saying, no, of course I don't have it. But when we changed the conversation and we started asking for them not to tell us if they have conflict of interest, but what were their interests, I mean, like what were the organizations that they were part of, or the companies that they own, or even if they have bank credits or debt, the conversation changed. And in our experience, they were more prompt to submit that information. But then we need to activate the anti-corruption agencies in order to compare and contrast and analyze information against every decision that they make.
Makes sense. Right, so we have time for 3 more questions. So we're going to be collecting, there's a question there at the back, and then I'll go to that side.
Morning. Thank you for the insights. I'm Siwar from iWatch, Transparency International in Tunisia. I have a question. If you have ever tried to work with the electoral independent authorities in your respective countries, and if there is any concrete action of advocacy to include this integrity criteria as eligibility criteria for candidacy in the first place. And thank you.
Great, thank you. There's 2 more questions there, or many more, but we can only take 2. Okay, so the lady there. Yeah.
Good morning. I'm Carmela Fonbuena from the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism. I'd like to briefly share what we're also doing in the Philippines. We focus on campaign finance. We look at the campaign donations of candidates, and simple things we've done was to put all the data they reported to the Commission on Elections on a Flourish table and make that accessible to the public. But recently, we've worked with data scientists to plug in historical statement of contributions and expenditures of candidates to see the history of donations that they've received. So we're very excited about this machine program, which we're still vetting at the moment, because we've also plugged in procurement data to see if the donors eventually won contracts. So we hope to put this, make this public, hopefully late this year or early next year, because we're going to have an election next year. My question I'm very interested in the Tres campaign, because it appears to me that this is all about disclosure. We've been relying on public data. In fact, we used to check the statement of contributions and expenditure against statement of assets and liabilities and net worth of candidates. It's a document that is not available to us anymore because it's restricted. But so I'm very interested in the process of Tres de Tres. This is all disclosure from candidates. And I was interested how willing they are to give this information, a percentage perhaps, because if they, in our case in the Philippines, they're not very willing to give out these documents to us. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. There was a lady behind who really wanted the mic, so I'm just going to let you ask the question.
Thank you. My name is Sheila Masinde from Transparency International Kenya, and we also have an experience in terms of trying to particularly vet political candidates, but particularly before the elections, but also not just political candidates, but also those who are appointed to public office, getting information from the courts, from parliamentary reports, the audit institution, the Anti-Corruption Commission in terms of who they're investigating, and so on. But my question, and we've tried to do this as a red card initiative for the last 2 elections over the last 10 years, but also what we found is that sometimes this is not enough, that it's also important to influence policy and legislative and institutional frameworks in terms of even having this kind of blocking of candidates or mechanisms to block candidates entrenched in the law or the constitution, or even establishing or strengthening institutions so they're able to actually do this work as a part of sustainability. So question related to the lady from Tunisia is whether in your own experiences you've also tried to push at that front, and what have been the successes in terms of policy and legislative and institutional frameworks to not just, of course, keep data on political candidates, but also use this to block them from actually getting into office. What's the experience in regard to that? And then one last thing, I like the responses you gave on security, but other than physical security, I think some of the threats that we face when we do this kind of work is also SLAP, or strategic legal, strategic litigation against public participation, or any other kind of court actions or demand letters that you get from, people that have been, end up in these black or red lists. How do you go about that in terms of also protecting yourselves legally? Thank you.
Wonderful, thanks. We can do one more because I'm going to merge these two questions for advocacy. So let's there's one question here at the front. And
thank you. My name's Anne Tolley. I'm from New Zealand. I chair Transparency International in New Zealand. But I've also been a cabinet minister in the New Zealand government for some time, not currently. I would like to know, thank you very much for the information you've given us today. I would like to know, what is the effect in your country's voting numbers by making that information much more available? So particularly Mexico, what effect has it had on the number of people who are now taking part in elections? Because I think right around the world we're seeing fewer and fewer people voting, particularly young people. And so some of those more entrenched, older people with entrenched political views perhaps having a greater say. So what effect is that information having on your voting numbers?
Okay, yeah, great. Thanks a lot for the questions. Let's start maybe sort of merging the one for advocacy and actually putting that as requirements for people getting elected. Is that something, I don't assume you two have done that in terms of advocacy, but maybe I will start with you on that one.
So 3 started as a voluntary exercise for candidates. In 2015, candidates could decide if they wanted or not to disclose information, and then voters decided based on if they uploaded or not the declaration. But this was an inspiration for probably one of the main interventions of the anti-corruption movement in Mexico, because after that we started a citizen initiative with the support of more than 500,000 citizens, and we managed to get this initiative to Congress, and now it's mandatory for every public officer in Mexico to disclose information on the assets, interests, and tax declarations. Right now we have information of more than 3 million public officers each year, because it's mandatory not only to present it when you start your job, but every year they need to upload new information, and once they leave office they also need to give like a last declaration on that. And related to candidates, we're trying to make it mandatory right now. So Mexico is a federation. We have 32 states. Right now it's mandatory in 8 of our states, and we are trying to make it mandatory for the whole country. But we know that right now the system is imperfect, and also the information is imperfect, but we are trying to keep going forward.
Just taking the last question, have you seen, I guess it's very difficult to say because we asked for this, then there's like more people voting and so on, but have you seen any differences or maybe more qualitative experience in your case of people saying, I'm going to vote now because there's all this information and I trust the process?
Yeah, I would say that right now, so we have a part of our political context right now is that we have those that believe only on propaganda and those that are trying to rely on information. And sadly, with our current administration, some of that information has stopped to go through the public. So now there is some part of the society that is asking candidates and public officers to start disclosing information related to this. So I would say that citizens are asking for more information and more technical information and information based on data and not only on lies. But right now the political context is kind of tricky.
Right, so let me go to Brandy and David. I would assume you're not doing advocacy campaigns, but like, would you see like something like what they did in Mexico just succeeding, for example, in Germany, in the US?
No.
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 Yeah.
No. We've got a quite similar organization in Germany, Abgeordnetenwatch, which is trying to collect this information or make the candidates more accessible so that it's easier to ask questions and so on. But there is no way that in Germany or in large parts of Europe this would ever become mandatory. There's some countries which are, but most not. And it's also the same with excluding candidates from running for public office, at least in Germany. It's very, very difficult. And I can't imagine a kind of legislation where it's prohibited for somebody just to run for office. It's in very seldom instances when you are a real crime guy, a mobster, but not an easy mobster, you know, not basic level. You need to be top gear. Then maybe you can be excluded. The reason for that is that in Germany too many people were excluded from everything and even killed. Yeah. And so, no chance.
Sure. How about the US, Brandy? Do you see that succeeding that?
I mean, it's still not mandatory that elected officers provide their taxes in the States. I think a lot of people sometimes are pressed into doing it for different legal reasons, or occasionally they get sort of public pressure to do it, but it's still not required. But the one advantage that we do have, at least at the congressional level, is that we do require financial disclosures. So one thing that we found really helpful is with those who, particularly those who have been in office for some time, is that using those forms, you can see how their financial situation has changed over the years. And so looking at over time how their income has changed while they've been in office can really give you an insight into how they're using their office to potentially increase their own wealth.
Sure, thanks. Thanks a lot for that. I think we need to wrap up. We have 3 minutes, so that's it. Thanks a lot to the speakers here. It was really interesting discussion. Thanks a lot to the audience and to the staff for helping us with this. Before I finish, I would just like to mention, allow me the self-promotion a little bit, is that we've organized this panel, the SIC initiative has organized this panel, which essentially is an organization that helps citizens do investigations in the public interest and also collaborate with newsrooms. That's to say, we work very closely with Sunlight, and we're trying to do that project also in other countries, like with Correctiv in Germany. So if you want to do that, if you've got any suggestions, projects that you want to collaborate, please get in touch, because we would be very happy to talk to you. So thanks a lot, thank you very much, and we hope you enjoyed the panel. Thank you.